The morning air hung still as 7-year-old Sophie Wilson stood frozen at the entrance of Echo Falls Animal Shelter. Her small fingers clutched her grandmother's hand with unexpected strength. 6 months of silence had followed her like a shadow since that terrible day, but nothing could have prepared anyone for what happened next. A sound pierced the quiet, not quite a bark, not quite a whimper. It was a cry so haunting, so filled with emotion, that it made the shelter workers pause mid-step. From the isolation ward at the back, the sound came again, raw, desperate, almost human. Sophie's body went rigid. Her wide eyes, which hadn't shown real recognition in months, suddenly sparked to life. Her lips parted, and to everyone's astonishment, a single word escaped in a whisper. "Duke?" Before anyone could react, Sophie broke free from her grandmother's grasp. She moved with purpose toward the sound, drawn by an invisible thread that no one else could see. 3 shelter workers watched in disbelief as the most fearful dog they'd ever rescued, a scarred German shepherd who cowered at human touch, suddenly pressed himself against the kennel door, his entire body trembling not with fear, but with recognition. What followed would change Echo Falls forever. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from. Now let's continue with the story. Echo Falls sat nestled in the shadow of the Appalachian Mountains, its weathered storefronts and quiet streets telling the story of a once thriving mining town now struggling to reinvent itself. The collapse of the Jefferson coal mine had left economic scars deeper than the shafts that honeycombed the mountains. But the people remained, bound by generations of shared history and small-town resilience. Among them was Sophie Wilson, a delicate 7-year-old with wide hazel eyes that seemed to look through people rather than at them. The doctors called it autism spectrum disorder, but to the residents of Echo Falls, she was simply poor Harry Wilson's little girl, the child who hadn't spoken a word since her therapy dog disappeared 6 months ago. Amanda Wilson, 34 and prematurely lined around the eyes, divided her time between shifts at the local diner and the town's only pharmacy. Widowed when a support beam gave way in the mine's final catastrophic collapse, she'd somehow found the strength to carry on for Sophie's sake. The child's silence weighed on her more heavily than grief. Martha Thompson, Amanda's mother and Sophie's grandmother, lived with them in the small blue house on Maple Street. A woman of firm opinions and firmer faith, Martha worried constantly about finances and what she called practical matters. The idea of spending precious dollars on another dog, especially after what happened to Duke, struck her as foolishness. They couldn't afford it. Duke had been no ordinary dog. The German shepherd had come into their lives through a therapy program after Harry's death, specially trained to work with children like Sophie. Where professional therapists had made little progress, Duke had somehow reached through Sophie's silence, becoming the bridge between her and the world. Jessica Miller, the assistant manager at Echo Falls Animal Shelter, had her own reasons for keeping a professional distance from the larger dogs in her care. The faded photograph of a smiling boy she kept on her desk told a story she rarely discussed, a son lost to a dog attack 10 years earlier. The town itself remained divided on the issue of dangerous breeds. Some, like Mayor Thomas Edwards, advocated for restrictions that would ban German Shepherds, Rottweilers, and similar breeds from Echo Falls entirely. Others felt each animal deserved to be judged on its own merits rather than condemned by bloodline. None of them could have predicted how one German Shepherd would soon force them all to reconsider their deepest convictions. The story of how Duke came into Sophie's life was one Amanda Wilson had told countless times during the desperate months of searching. It began 3 weeks after Harry Wilson's funeral, when the social worker had suggested animal therapy might help Sophie process her grief. "She's retreating further into herself," the woman had explained gently, watching Sophie rock silently in the corner of the living room. Children on the spectrum already struggle with emotional processing, Add trauma like losing her father. The social worker had passed Amanda a brochure for Healing Paws, a program that paired specially trained dogs with children facing challenges. Martha had scoffed initially. A dog won't bring Harry back, she'd said, but desperation had led Amanda to drive 40 miles to the Healing Paws facility, Sophie silent beside her in the back seat, clutching her father's mining helmet like a talisman. Ew. The coordinator had introduced them to 3 potential therapy dogs that day. The Golden Retriever was too energetic, the Labrador too distracted by passing staff. But when the German Shepherd named Duke had padded into the room and immediately settled at Sophie's feet, something extraordinary happened. The child, who had barely acknowledged human presence since her father's death, slowly reached out one small hand and touched the dog's ear. "He knows," Sophie had whispered, her first words in weeks. Within a month, Duke had come to live with them permanently. The transformation in Sophie was remarkable. Where therapists had failed to break through her silence, Duke succeeded. She spoke to him, read to him, told him secrets. More importantly, with Duke beside her, she began speaking to others again, too. "It's like he translates the world for her," Amanda had explained to a skeptical Martha. "Makes it less overwhelming." For 5 glorious months, Sophie blossomed. She started attending school again, Duke accompanying her as a registered therapy animal. Her teachers marveled at her progress, how she'd raise her hand in class if Duke gave her a gentle nudge, how playground interactions became possible with him lying watchfully nearby. The accident happened on an unseasonably warm October day. Amanda had taken Sophie and Duke for a walk along the creek path. Duke was leashed, well-behaved as always, when a rabbit darted across their path. Something primal awoke in the German Shepherd, perhaps some forgotten instinct from ancestors who had hunted to survive. With unexpected strength, he pulled free from Amanda's grip and chased after the rabbit. Sophie had screamed, a sound that still haunted Amanda's dreams. Duke had run into the street. The driver of the blue pickup truck hadn't stood a chance of stopping in time. The sickening thud, Duke's yelp of pain, these sounds had branded themselves into Amanda's memory. She'd gathered Sophie into her arms, shielding her daughter's eyes from the sight of Duke's still form on the asphalt. A crowd gathered quickly. This was Echo Falls, after all, where neighbors still looked out for one another. Someone called the veterinarian. 2 men Amanda didn't recognize had rushed forward, claiming they worked with animal rescue, and "We'll take him to emergency care," one had said, already lifting Duke's limp body. "You take care of your little girl." In the chaos of Sophie's hysterical crying, Amanda had nodded gratefully, watching through tears as they loaded Duke into a van. One had handed her a business card that she'd stuffed into her pocket without looking, focused entirely on her daughter's breakdown. Only later did she discover the card was blank. The local veterinarian had no record of Duke being brought in. The regional animal hospitals had never seen him. The men in their van had vanished, along with Sophie's beloved Duke. And Sophie had stopped speaking. Again. The silence was different this time, deeper, more absolute. Where grief for her father had made her withdrawn, losing Duke seemed to lock her away completely. She stopped making eye contact. She refused to participate in therapy. The school's counselor used terms like regression and trauma response. For 6 grueling months, Amanda searched. She put up posters called shelters within a 100-mile radius, posted in online forums. Martha supported her efforts initially, but as weeks stretched into months, her practical nature reasserted itself. "Amanda, you need to help Sophie move on," she said one evening after Sophie had gone to bed. "This can't be healthy, holding on to hope this way." "What would you have me do?" Amanda had snapped, exhaustion fraying her patience. "Get her another dog?" "She doesn't want another dog. She wants Duke." The breakthrough, if you could call it that, came during Sophie's session with Dr. Levine, her therapist. After months of sitting silently through appointments, Sophie had suddenly retrieved her coloring supplies and drawn a picture. A German shepherd surrounded by bars. "Think she's trying to tell us something," Dr. Levine had said carefully. "Children often communicate through art what they can't express in words." "You think she's saying Duke is in a shelter?" Amanda had asked, studying the crude drawing of cage-like lines. Dr. Levine had nodded slowly. "It might be worth visiting local shelters. Not with the expectation of finding Duke necessarily, but perhaps as closure." Martha, surprisingly, had agreed. "I'll take her," she volunteered. "You've already missed too much work because of this." But the morning of their planned visit to Echo Falls Animal Shelters, Sophie had thrown her first tantrum in months, refusing to go with Martha. She'd pointed frantically at Amanda, her message clear even without words. She would only go with her mother. "Fine," Martha had conceded. "But this needs to be the end of it, Amanda. One last try, and then we help her accept that Duke is gone." Amanda had agreed, though her heart rebelled against the finality of it. How do you help a child accept loss when you can't accept it yourself? But, for Sophie's sake, she would try. And so they came to stand at the entrance of Echo Falls Animal Shelter on that fateful morning. Sophie clutching her grandmother's hand, Amanda steeling herself for yet another disappointment. None of them prepared for the cry that would shatter 6 months of silence and change everything. Jessica Miller's morning had begun like any other at Echo Falls Animal Shelter. She'd arrived early to check on the new arrivals, particularly the German shepherd that had been brought in the previous night. The dog was in terrible condition, scarred, malnourished, and so terrified of human contact that Dr. Johnson had been unable to complete a proper examination. Jessica had experience with abused animals, but something about this one troubled her deeply. "Keep everyone away from Kennel 7, she'd instructed the volunteers. "That shepherd needs time." When the bell above the entrance chimed at precisely 9 o'clock, Jessica had looked up from her paperwork to see Martha Thompson, one of Echo Falls' most respected elders, accompanied by Amanda Wilson and her daughter Sophie. Jessica knew them by sight, of course. Everyone in Echo Falls knew the Wilson tragedy. First, the father in the mine collapse, then the therapy dog disappearance that had sent little Sophie back into her shell. "Good morning," Jessica said, her tone professionally cordial but reserved. "How can I help you today?" Amanda stepped forward, dark circles under her eyes testifying to months of sleepless nights. "We're looking for a dog, a German shepherd that went missing about 6 months ago." Jessica felt a twinge of sympathy despite herself. "I'm sorry, but we haven't had any German shepherds come through recently that have been here that long." The lie came easily. She'd long ago learned to manage expectations. False hope was crueler than honest disappointment. "Could we just look around?" Amanda persisted. "Sophie's therapist thought it might help with closure." Jessica hesitated, her eyes dropping to the silent child clutching her grandmother's hand. Something in the girl's vacant expression struck a painful chord, a reminder of another child long ago, whose laughter would never be heard again. She pushed the memory away. "You can look at the adoption floor," she conceded, "but I should warn you that we do have a German shepherd in isolation. He came in last night, and he's not in good shape. He's not suitable for viewing, and certainly not for adoption." She emphasized the last part firmly. Sophie's head had snapped up at the mention of a German shepherd, a spark of something, awareness, perhaps, flickering in her previously empty gaze. "We understand," Martha said quickly before Amanda could press the issue. "We'll just walk through the regular kennels." Jessica nodded and returned to her paperwork, listening as Martha's sensible shoes tapped down the corridor toward the adoption floor, accompanied by Amanda's worn sneakers and the barely audible shuffle of Sophie's small feet. It was the stillness that caught Jessica's attention a few minutes later. The shelter was never truly quiet. Dogs barked, cats meowed, cages rattled, but something had changed in the ambient noise. Then came the sound from Isolation Room 7, a sound Jessica would later struggle to describe to others. Not quite a howl, not exactly a whimper, but something heart-wrenching that seemed to contain within it both joy and sorrow. Jessica was on her feet instantly, hurrying toward the isolation area. She rounded the corner just in time to see little Sophie Wilson break free from her grandmother's grasp and run toward the sound with unexpected purpose. "Hey, you can't go back there," Jessica called out, quickening her pace. But Sophie had already reached Kennel 7, pressing her small palms against the reinforced glass window of the isolation room. The scene that unfolded before Jessica's eyes defied everything she thought she knew about traumatized animals. The German Shepherd, who had cowered and growled at every human approach since his arrival, was now standing alert, his tail beginning a hesitant wag that quickly grew more confident. As Sophie stared through the glass, the dog placed his paw against the barrier where her hand rested, as if trying to touch her through the separation. "Duke!" The word, spoken in a child's voice rusty from disuse, silenced every other sound in the shelter. Jessica reached for Sophie, instinctively wanting to pull her away from the unpredictable animal, but Amanda caught her arm. "Wait," Amanda whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Look at them." The transformation in both child and dog was undeniable. Sophie's face had come alive with emotion, the vacant mask replaced by desperate hope. The dog's entire demeanor had changed from fearful aggression to yearning recognition. "That's not possible," Jessica murmured. "This dog was brought in by County Animal Control. They found him chained behind an abandoned property. He's been abused, used for—" She stopped herself, remembering the child's presence. Martha stepped forward, her lined face both stern and pleading. "Is there any possibility this could be Duke? Sophie's dog went missing 6 months ago after an accident." Jessica's professional certainty wavered. In 15 years of animal rescue work, she'd never seen a reaction like this. The dog was now pressing himself against the door, whining with unmistakable recognition, his eyes never leaving Sophie. "I need to call Dr. Johnson," Jessica said, reaching for her phone. "This dog hasn't let anyone near him. He'll need to be sedated before—" "No!" Sophie's voice rang out again, stronger this time. "No hurt, Duke." The adults froze at the sound of Sophie's voice, a voice Amanda and Martha hadn't heard in half a year. "Sophie, honey." Amanda knelt beside her daughter, voice shaking with emotion. "Are you sure this is Duke? Really sure?" Sophie nodded vigorously, her small hands still pressed against the glass. "Duke has a star," she said clearly, pointing to her chest. Jessica felt a chill run down her spine. The German Shepherd did indeed have a distinctive white patch on his chest, roughly star-shaped, partially obscured by scars, but unmistakable now that it had been pointed out. "Let me out," Sophie demanded with unexpected authority. "Duke needs me." Years of protocol and caution warred with the evidence before Jessica's eyes. Regulations stated that aggressive animals couldn't be approached without proper restraints and muzzles. The dog's file indicated severe trauma and potential for unpredictable behavior. But something deeper than protocol was stirring in Jessica, perhaps the part of her that had been buried alongside her son 10 years ago. "Stand back from the door," she said finally, pulling out her security key card. "If he shows any sign of aggression, I'm shutting this down immediately." Martha started to protest, but Amanda quieted her with a look. Both women moved a few steps back, though Amanda kept her hands ready to grab Sophie if necessary. Jessica swiped her card, the electronic lock disengaging with a soft click. She eased the door open just wide enough for Sophie to slip through, ready to slam it shut at the first sign of trouble. What happened next would be described differently by each witness. Martha would call it a miracle. Amanda would say it was the power of love. Dr. Johnson, reviewing the shelter's security footage later, would label it unprecedented behavioral reversal. But Jessica, who had spent 10 years hating and fearing dogs like this one, saw something that shook the foundations of her carefully constructed world view. The moment Sophie entered the room, the German Shepherd, a dog that minutes earlier had been considered too dangerous to approach, sank to the ground in a posture of absolute submission and trust. Then, most astonishingly of all, he began to cry, making that same strange, almost human sound they had heard earlier, as Sophie wrapped her small arms around his scarred neck and whispered, "I found you." The reunion of Sophie and Duke created ripples throughout Echo Falls that extended far beyond the shelter walls. Within hours, the story had spread through the town's ever-reflexive grapevine, from Martha's excited call to her church prayer group, to the shelter volunteers who couldn't help sharing what they'd witnessed. By afternoon, Amanda's phone buzzed constantly with text messages from well-meaning neighbors and friends. "It's a miracle," they said. "Divine intervention," others suggested. But miracles, as Echo Falls would soon discover, were complicated things that rarely solved practical problems. The first obstacle appeared almost immediately in the form of shelter paperwork. Jessica Miller sat across from Amanda in the shelter's small office, a stack of forms between them, her professional facade firmly back in place after the emotional scene in Isolation Room 7. "I understand this is Duke," Jessica said, choosing her words carefully. "Sophie's reaction makes that fairly clear. But legally speaking, he was brought in as a stray. There's a process we have to follow." Amanda leaned forward. "He's microchipped. We registered him when he became Sophie's therapy dog." "We scanned him," Jessica replied, avoiding eye contact. "No chip was detected." "That's impossible," Amanda protested. "Unless—" Jessica nodded grimly. "It appears to have been removed, rather crudely, according to the scar Dr. Johnson found." She hesitated before adding, "That's not uncommon when dogs are repurposed." The implication hung heavy in the small office. Amanda closed her eyes briefly, not wanting to imagine what Duke had endured during those missing months. "Without a chip, you'll need to provide proof of ownership," Jessica continued. "Vaccination records, photographs, adoption papers." From Healing Paw, Amanda rubbed her temples. "I have all of that at home, but he can't stay here tonight. You've seen how he is with Sophie. She's spoken more in the last hour than in 6 months." From the adjoining room came the sound of Sophie's voice, soft but clear, talking continuously to Duke as Martha supervised their reunion. The sound brought unexpected tears to Jessica's eyes. "I can expedite the paperwork," she conceded. "But there's another issue. Dr. Johnson needs to complete Duke's medical evaluation. Based on his condition, it may not be good news." As if summoned by his name, Dr. Robert Johnson appeared in the doorway, his weathered face grave. At 68, he'd been Echo Falls' only veterinarian for over 40 years, treating everything from prize cattle to beloved family pets. "Amanda," he said gently, "could we speak privately?" Jessica immediately stood. "Use my office. I'll check on Sophie and Duke." When they were alone, Dr. Johnson sank heavily into the chair Jessica had vacated. "I've completed my initial examination," he began. Duke allowed it once Sophie was present. "First, the good news. He's not contagious or an immediate health risk to Sophie." "And the bad news?" Amanda asked, bracing herself. Dr. Johnson sighed. "He's been severely mistreated. The scars, the malnourishment, those are obvious. But there are injection sites, consistent patterns that suggest—" He paused. "Amanda, I believe Duke was used in some form of laboratory testing. possibly experimental medications or procedures. Amanda felt sick. Will he recover? Physically, with proper care, much of the damage can be reversed. Good nutrition, medication, time. Behaviorally, that's more complicated. He seems remarkably stable with Sophie, but he may have triggers, fears, reactions that could emerge over time. Dr. Johnson leaned forward. There will be costs involved, significant ones. The unspoken question hung in the air. Could the struggling Wilson family afford what Duke needed? The conversation with Dr. Johnson was only the beginning. By evening, when Amanda finally brought Duke home, a temporary release pending paperwork completion, Martha voiced the concerns she'd been holding back at the shelter. Amanda, I'm thrilled for Sophie. Truly I am, Martha said as they watched Sophie lead Duke through the house, showing him his old toys, his old bed, speaking to him in full sentences for the first time in months. But have you thought this through? The veterinary bills alone. No, Mom, Amanda sighed. I know. We're barely making ends meet as it is. And if he's been abused, used in fighting or experiments or whatever horrible thing happened, what if he snaps? What if he hurts someone? The question struck a nerve. He would never hurt Sophie, Amanda said firmly. Martha's expression softened. Not intentionally, perhaps, but traumatized creatures, even people, can lash out without meaning to. Before Amanda could respond, Sophie appeared in the doorway, Duke at her side. The German Shepherd stayed perfectly positioned next to the little girl, matching his pace to hers, his eyes rarely leaving her face. Duke wants water, Sophie announced. Such a simple sentence. But Amanda and Martha exchanged glances of wonder. After months of silence or one-word responses, even this mundane communication felt miraculous. Of course, honey, Amanda replied, reaching for Duke's old water bowl, still kept in the cabinet despite Martha's previous suggestions to donate it. As Sophie guided Duke to his water, Martha watched with a mixture of joy and trepidation. I just pray we're not setting ourselves up for more heartbreak, she whispered. The town's reaction proved equally complex. Mayor Thomas Edwards visited personally the following day, ostensibly to welcome Duke home, but his agenda quickly became clear. It's a heartwarming story, he acknowledged, standing stiffly in the Wilsons' modest living room, eyeing Duke with barely concealed unease. The kind that makes Echo Falls proud. But there are concerns. What concerns exactly? Amanda asked, though she already knew. The mayor cleared his throat. Public safety, primarily. This dog has been through significant trauma, and German Shepherds already account for a disproportionate number of serious bites nationwide. Sophie, sitting on the floor with Duke, looked up at the unfamiliar word. What's dispro, that word? Mayor Edwards softened momentarily. It means more than expected, young lady. Sophie considered this, then stated with absolute certainty. Duke doesn't bite, he helps. The mayor smiled tightly. I'm sure he does. But as mayor, I need to think about everyone's safety. The town council is considering an ordinance about certain breeds for public protection. Amanda felt a surge of protective anger. You mean breed-specific legislation, banning certain dogs just because of what they are, not what they've done? Yet it's a complex issue, the mayor hedged. Many communities have found it's the simplest solution. Simplest doesn't mean right, Amanda countered. Duke is a trained therapy dog. He helped Sophie when nothing else could. And now you want to punish him for what breed he happens to be? The tension was broken by Martha, who had remained silent until now. Thomas, she said, using the mayor's first name with the familiarity of someone who'd known him since childhood, would you like some coffee? Amanda, let's not have this discussion in front of Sophie. The diplomatic intervention worked. As Sophie continued reacquainting Duke with the house, The adults moved to the kitchen, where the conversation continued in more measured tones. By the time Mayor Edwards left, nothing had been resolved, but Amanda understood the battle lines being drawn. The proposed ordinance wasn't just about Dude. It represented a deeper divide in Echo Falls between traditional values and evolving perspectives, between fear and understanding, between easy answers and more complicated truths. Dr. Johnson's follow-up visit 3 days later brought more complexity. Duke, though still severely underweight, was showing remarkable improvement in Sophie's presence. He followed her commands, remained calm around Martha despite her initial nervousness, and even allowed Dr. Johnson to examine him as long as Sophie held his leash. His physical recovery will take time, Dr. Johnson explained, but I am more concerned about potential behavioral issues. Dogs that have been used in fighting or laboratory testing often develop triggers, sensitivities to certain sounds, movements, or situations that can cause fear responses. Seems fine, Amanda said hopefully. With Sophie, yes. She's his safe person. But what about at school, in public, around other children or animals? Dr. Johnson removed his glasses, polishing them thoughtfully. I'm recommending specialized training. There's a rehabilitation program for traumatized service animals in Ridgemont. It's expensive, but it might be covered if we can restore Duke's therapy dog certification. The word expensive echoed in Amanda's mind, joining the growing list of concerns. The medical bills were already mounting. Special diet, medication, supplements, follow-up visits. Amanda had taken on extra shifts at the pharmacy, but it wasn't enough. More unexpected was Duke's effect on Jessica Miller. The shelter assistant manager began calling daily to check on Duke's progress, then offering to stop by with donated supplies, high-quality dog food, a new bed, medications provided by anonymous donors whom Amanda suspected might be Jessica herself. On her third visit, Jessica arrived as Sophie was teaching Duke a new signed language command in the backyard. Amanda watched from the kitchen window as Jessica stood transfixed by the sight. "She's teaching him signs?" Jessica asked when she came inside. Amanda nodded. She learned them in therapy after Duke disappeared. Now she's teaching them back to him. Dr. Johnson thinks it might help with his rehabilitation, giving him new associations, new ways to communicate. Jessica placed a bag of supplies on the counter, her expression thoughtful. "I've never seen anything like it. Most dogs that come out of situations like Duke's, they don't recover like this, not so quickly." "Sophie is the difference," Amanda said simply. "Yes," Jessica agreed. "She is." After a hesitation, she added, "The mayor came by the shelter yesterday, asked about Duke's background, about whether he poses a risk." Amanda stiffened. "And what did you tell him?" "The truth. That any dog, regardless of breed, can be dangerous in the wrong circumstances, and any dog, including a traumatized German Shepherd, can be safe with proper training and care." Jessica's expression hardened. "I also told him that if he's concerned about public safety, maybe he should focus on the abandoned Jefferson mining equipment that kids play on instead of scapegoating an innocent animal." The unexpected alliance with Jessica proved valuable in the days that followed. Duke's behavioral issues began to surface, a violent flinching at the sound of metal clanging, panic attacks during thunderstorms, freezing in fear when certain chemical smells wafted from cleaning products. Each reaction provided another clue to the trauma he had endured. Through it all, Sophie remained Duke's anchor. Where adults saw a damaged animal, she saw only her friend who needed help. She developed workarounds for his triggers with intuitive understanding, covering his ears during loud noises, creating a safe den under her bed where he could retreat when overwhelmed, teaching him new signs for friend and safe and home. Martha, despite her initial reservations, found herself moved by Sophie's dedication and Duke's gradual improvement. When Amanda came home from a double shift to find Martha asleep on the couch with Duke protectively curled at her feet, she knew a corner had been turned in at least one battle. The wider community remained divided. Some neighbors brought welcome home gifts for Duke new toys, treats, even a hand-knitted dog sweater from Mrs. Patterson, the retired English teacher. Others crossed the street when they saw Amanda walking Duke, whispering concerns about that dangerous dog and irresponsible parenting. The division came to a head at Sophie's first attempt to return to school. The principal, Mr. Winters, met them at the entrance, his expression apologetic but firm. "I'm sorry, Amanda," he said quietly. "The school board has concerns about liability. Until Duke receives recertification as a therapy animal, he can't come on school grounds." Sophie, who had been chattering excitedly about showing Duke to her classmates, fell silent, her hand tightening on Duke's leash. "Sophie has an IEP," Amanda argued, referring to the individualized education plan developed for Sophie's special needs. "Duke's presence is part of her accommodation." "That was before," Mr. Winters said uncomfortably. Before the incident. We need documentation that he's safe." "He is safe," Sophie interjected with unexpected clarity. "Duke helps me be brave." The principal knelt to Sophie's level. "I know he does, Sophie. And we want you to be brave at school, but we have to make sure everyone is safe, including Duke." "This is discrimination," Amanda said, anger rising, "against both my daughter and her service animal." "It's not permanent," Mr. Winters assured her, "just until we have certification." "Certification costs money," Amanda replied bluntly. "Money we don't have because we're spending it on Duke's medical care. It's a catch-22, and meanwhile Sophie's education suffers." The confrontation ended in stalemate, with Sophie refusing to enter the school without Duke, and Amanda taking her home rather than forcing the issue. As they walked back down the tree-lined street, Duke, attentive at Sophie's side despite his still recovering body, Amanda fought back tears of frustration. "It's not fair," Sophie said suddenly, looking up at her mother with clear-eyed understanding that seemed beyond her 7 years. "They judge Duke because he looks scary, but he's good inside." The simple wisdom struck Amanda forcefully. "Yes, honey, you're exactly right." That evening, after Sophie had gone to bed, Duke loyally curled beside her, Amanda sat at the kitchen table with Martha, bills spread before them. We can't afford the certification program," Amanda admitted, voice breaking. "Not with these medical bills. But without it, Sophie can't return to school with him, and she won't go without him." Martha studied the figures, her practical nature wrestling with her growing attachment to both Sophie's progress and Duke himself. Finally, she reached a decision. "Your father's fishing cabin," she said. "We could sell it." Amanda looked up in shock. The small cabin at Lake Henderson had been in the family for generations. It was the last property they owned outright besides their home, kept more for sentimental value than practical use since Harry's death. "Mom, no. Dad loved that place. You love that place." Martha reached across the table to take her daughter's hand. "What your father would love more is seeing his granddaughter speaking again, healing, coming back to life." She squeezed Amanda's fingers. "Sometimes letting go of one treasure helps you keep something more precious." As they discussed the painful but necessary decision, neither noticed Jessica Miller's car pulling up outside, or the folder she carried as she approached their door. A folder containing information that would change everything they thought they knew about Duke's disappearance. The town hall of Echo Falls had stood since 1887, its brick facade and white columns weathered by time, but still imposing on Main Street. Tonight, every wooden pew inside was filled. Shopkeepers beside miners' widows, farmers alongside teachers, families with deep roots and newcomers alike. The emergency town meeting about Ordinance 23, more commonly known as the Dangerous Breeds Ban, had drawn the largest crowd anyone could remember since the mine collapse. Mayor Thomas Edwards stood at the podium, perspiration beading on his forehead despite the building's struggling air conditioning. At 62, he'd served as mayor for 15 years, guiding Echo Falls through economic downturns and natural disasters with steady, if unimaginative, leadership. Tonight, however, he faced a deeply divided community with no easy path to consensus. "Order, please," he called over the murmuring crowd. "We're here to discuss the proposed ordinance regarding certain dog breeds within town limits. The council has prepared a presentation on statistical data regarding bite incidents and public safety concerns." In the third row, Amanda Wilson sat rigidly between Martha and Jessica Miller, an unlikely alliance forged over the past weeks. Sophie wasn't present. Amanda had decided the contentious atmosphere would be too overwhelming. But Duke's fate hung over the proceedings like a shadow. "Before we begin," Mayor Edwards continued, "I want to emphasize that this ordinance isn't targeted at any specific animal. It's about establishing guidelines for community safety." "That's horseshit, Thomas, and you know it," called out Frank Delaney, whose hardware store had been a fixture on Main Street for 30 years. "This is about Wilson's dog, plain and simple." A rumble of agreement rose from one side of the room, matched by disapproving murmurs from the other. The mayor rapped his gavel, restoring a fragile order. "We'll have time for comments after the presentation. First, Animal Control Officer Parker will share the data that prompted this proposal." As Officer Parker, a young man with a nervous demeanor, fumbled with his notes at the podium, Jessica leaned close to Amanda and whispered, "Don't worry. We've got our own data ready." The presentation that followed was a parade of statistics and graphic photos, dog bite injuries, national breed-specific attack rates, insurance liability concerns. With each slide, Amanda felt the room's atmosphere grow heavier, the glances cast in her direction more pointed. When Officer Parker finished, Mayor Edwards invited public comment. The first to approach the microphone was Reverend Wallace from First Baptist. "I've known Martha Thompson for 40 years, he began, nodding toward Martha. "A finer Christian woman you won't find. But good intentions don't change facts. German Shepherds are powerful animals bred for protection work. This particular dog, despite his history with the Wilson child, has been through trauma that makes him unpredictable. As a community, we must prioritize safety over sentiment." A chorus of amens followed his statement. Amanda closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. Next came Helen Parker, the elementary school principal's wife, whose statement about putting children first received vigorous applause from the ordinance supporters. 3 more speakers followed, all in favor of the ban, each more emphatic than the last. Amanda began to lose hope as she watched the room's momentum build against them. When Mayor Edwards called for opposing viewpoints, the silence stretched uncomfortably until Jessica Miller stood and walked purposefully to the microphone. "Many of you know me as the assistant manager at Echo Falls Animal Shelter," she began, her voice steady despite her white-knuckled grip on her notes. "Some of you also know I lost my son Michael to a dog attack 10 years ago." A hush fell over the room. Jessica's personal tragedy wasn't openly discussed in Echo Falls, but everyone knew the story. "For a decade, I've lived with fear and hatred of dogs like the one that took my child," Jessica continued. "I've supported restrictions, avoided certain breeds, held on to my pain like a shield. And then I met Duke." She turned toward Amanda, offering a small smile before facing the crowd again. "Duke came to our shelter so traumatized he couldn't be approached. He'd been abused, experimented on, treated with cruelty I can't describe in mixed company. By every statistical probability, he should be aggressive, dangerous, beyond rehabilitation." Jessica paused, taking a deep breath. "Instead, I witnessed something that challenged everything I believed. This dog, upon reuniting with a 7-year-old autistic child, showed more gentleness, more patience, more controlled behavior than many humans I know. Her voice grew stronger. "I've spent weeks observing their interaction. I've consulted with animal behaviorists and medical experts. The bond between Sophie Wilson and Duke isn't just touching, it's therapeutic for both of them." She held up a folder. "I have documentation from the Healing Paws program certifying Duke's original training and statements from 3 veterinary behaviorists who have evaluated him since his return. Their professional conclusion is that Duke poses no greater risk than any other dog when properly managed, and in fact shows exceptional restraint and intelligence." The crowd stirred, some shifting uncomfortably as their assumptions were challenged. "More importantly," Jessica continued, "I have data on dog bites in Echo Falls over the past decade. Of 37 reported incidents, only 2 involved German Shepherds, and both were provoked attacks where the dogs had been neglected and improperly restrained. Meanwhile, 12 incidents involved small breeds that would be exempt under this ordinance." Mayor Edwards cleared his throat. "Ms. Miller, while we appreciate your input, emotional appeals—" "This isn't emotional, Mr. Mayor," Jessica interrupted, her tone sharp. "This is factual. Breed-specific legislation doesn't work. Cities that have implemented it show no significant decrease in dog bite incidents. What does work is responsible ownership, proper training, and education." She looked directly at the mayor. "If public safety is truly your concern, perhaps focus on the abandoned mining equipment where teenagers drink on weekends, or the crumbling bridge on County Road 8, or the fact that our town has no mental health services for children. Don't use an innocent animal as a political scapegoat because it's easier than addressing real problems." A stunned silence followed her words, broken by a slow clap from Frank Delaney that spread until half the room was applauding. Jessica returned to her seat, trembling slightly as the adrenaline ebbed. The momentum had shifted. 3 more speakers opposed the ordinance, including Dr. Johnson, who provided professional testimony about Duke's rehabilitation, and, surprisingly, Mr. Winters, the school principal, who acknowledged that the school board had been too hasty in barring Duke. As the final speaker finished, Mayor Edwards called for a 15-minute recess before the council would deliberate. Amanda turned to Jessica, eyes brimming with gratitude. "I had no idea you were preparing all that," she said. "Thank you. Doesn't seem adequate." Jessica shook her head. "I should have done it sooner. For 10 years, I've let fear dictate my actions. Watching Sophie with Duke, it's helped me see things differently." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the back of the hall. Martha, who had stepped outside to call and check on Sophie, burst back through the doors, her face pale with alarm. "Amanda," she called. "Sophie's not answering. Mrs. Abernathy says she went to look for her grandson. He wandered off while she was watching them. She can't find either of them." Amanda's heart plummeted. "What do you mean, wandered off? Where's Duke?" "To Sophie," Martha said. "They were playing in the backyard while Mrs. Abernathy watched from the porch. She got distracted by a phone call, and when she looked up, Tommy was gone. Sophie took Duke to help find him." Amanda was already moving toward the door, Jessica and Martha close behind. Mayor Edwards, noticing the disturbance, approached with concern. "What's happening?" "Sophie's missing," Amanda said tersely, "and so is your grandson." The mayor's face drained of color. "Tommy was staying with my sister tonight. She didn't mention." "Well, he's missing now," Martha said, "and Sophie's gone looking for him with Duke." The news spread through the hall like wildfire. Within minutes, the town meeting had transformed into a search party, people splitting into groups, calling out coordination plans. "Tommy likes the river," Mayor Edwards said, voice tight with worry. "He's always trying to go there to catch frogs." "The river's swollen from the rains," Frank Delaney warned. "Current's dangerous." Amanda felt dread coating her throat like ashes. The Wilson Creek that gave Echo Falls its name was normally gentle, but spring rains had transformed it into a churning threat. Even strong adult swimmers would struggle in those waters. "I'll take the eastern path," Jessica volunteered. "Amanda, you know where Sophie might go looking?" They separated at the town hall steps, flashlight beams cutting through the gathering dusk as search parties dispersed throughout Echo Falls. Amanda ran toward home first, calling Sophie's name, hoping against hope that her daughter had simply returned. The empty house confirmed her fears. Grabbing Sophie's jacket for scent if search dogs became necessary, Amanda headed toward the river path. Sophie knew she wasn't allowed near the water alone, but if she believed Tommy was in danger. Amanda's thoughts were interrupted by distant barking. Distinctive, purposeful barks she recognized immediately. "Duke," she whispered, changing direction toward the sound. The barking grew louder as she approached the old footbridge, a decrepit wooden structure that had been closed to pedestrians for years. In the fading light, Amanda could make out two small figures on the far side of the bridge, one standing, one lying motionless on the ground, and the unmistakable silhouette of a German shepherd standing guard beside them. "Is he?" Amanda shouted, relief crashing through her. The standing figure turned. "Mom, Tommy fell. He's hurt." Amanda's relief evaporated as she assessed the situation. The footbridge was too dangerous to cross, rotted planks barely hanging on to rusted supports. The river below churned angrily, swollen with rain and debris. To reach the children, she'd need to take the main bridge and double back. Precious minutes when Tommy might be seriously injured. "Sophie, is he breathing?" Amanda called across the rushing water. "Yes, but his leg is hurt and he hit his head." "I'm calling for help. Don't move him." As Amanda fumbled for her phone, she heard other voices approaching. Jessica and two volunteers from the search party. They quickly assessed the situation. "The ambulance is 10 minutes out," one man reported after making the call. "They'll access from the north side." "Sophie needs to keep him warm and still until help arrives," Jessica said. "The temperature's dropping." Amanda cupped her hands around her mouth. "Sophie, help is coming. You need to keep Tommy warm." Across the distance, they watched as Sophie nodded, then made a series of hand gestures toward Duke. To Amanda's amazement, the dog immediately lay down beside the unconscious boy, pressing his body warmth against Tommy. "She's using the signs," Jessica murmured, "the ones she taught Duke." More searchers arrived, including Mayor Edwards, who let out a cry of distress at the sight of his grandson's still form. "We need to get to them now." "His bridge won't hold an adult," Frank Delaney warned, testing a plank with his foot and jumping back as it cracked. "We'll have to wait for rescue services." But nature had other plans. A loud crack echoed through the gathering darkness as a large branch carried by the current slammed into the bridge supports. The entire structure shuddered ominously. "Sophie!" Amanda screamed. "Get away from the bridge!" Across the water, Sophie stood, making another series of hand signals to Duke. The German shepherd immediately rose and took Tommy's jacket collar gently in his mouth, beginning to drag the boy away from the collapsing structure. "What is she doing?" Mayor Edwards asked, panic in his voice. "She's telling Duke to move Tommy to safety," Jessica explained, wonder in her voice. "She's using sign language to direct him." They watched in awe as Duke, still weak from his ordeal and rehabilitation, summoned strength to carefully drag Tommy yard by yard away from the crumbling bridge. Sophie followed, continuing to sign instructions, guiding Duke toward higher ground as the riverbank began to erode under the assault of rising waters. A final devastating crack announced the bridge's collapse. With a groan of twisting metal and splintering wood, it fell into the churning river below, carrying with it the most direct path to the children. In the distance, sirens wailed as emergency vehicles approached, but all eyes remained fixed on the other shore, where a 7-year-old autistic girl and her once-broken German shepherd had just saved the mayor's grandson from certain disaster. "My God," Mayor Edwards whispered, tears streaming unchecked down his face. "That animal, he's saving Tommy." "It's not just an animal," Amanda said quietly. "That's Duke, Sophie's Duke. And they're a team." As rescue workers arrived and began the longer route to reach the children, the assembled townspeople of Echo Falls witnessed what would later be described as a transformation, not just in Duke, who stood protective vigil despite his own exhaustion, not just in Sophie, who calmly relayed information through her mother's shouted questions, but in themselves. In the face of crisis, the labels and fears that had divided them fell away, revealing a simple truth that no ordinance or regulation could capture. Sometimes salvation comes in unexpected forms, and sometimes the very thing we fear most becomes the thing that saves us. The flash of cameras greeted Duke's return to the Wilson home 3 days after the river rescue. Local news vans lined the quiet street, reporters hungry for follow-up stories on the heroic German shepherd who had saved the mayor's grandson. Amanda shooed them from the front porch with firm politeness, drawing the curtains against their intrusive lenses. Inside, the atmosphere was far from celebratory. Duke lay on his bed in the living room, his condition visibly deteriorated since the rescue. The exertion of dragging Tommy to safety had taken a toll on his already weakened body. His breathing came in shallow pants, his once olive eyes now dull with pain. Dr. Johnson knelt beside him, stethoscope pressed to Duke's ribcage, his weathered face grave as he completed his examination. Sophie sat cross-legged nearby, her small hand resting on Duke's paw, her eyes never leaving the veterinarian's face. "Well?" Amanda asked, when Dr. Johnson finally stood, joints creaking from too many years of bending over examining tables. The old veterinarian gestured toward the kitchen, indicating they should speak privately. Amanda hesitated, glancing at Sophie. "It's okay, Mom," Sophie said quietly. "I'll stay with Duke." In the kitchen, Martha was already putting on the kettle, her instinctive response to crisis. Dr. Johnson sank into a chair at the table, removing his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. "It's not good," he said without preamble. "His kidneys are failing." Amanda gripped the back of a chair. "From the rescue, the strain of—" "No," Dr. Johnson interrupted gently. "This was coming regardless. Remember I mentioned evidence of experimental drugs? Based on the blood work, Duke was subjected to repeated pharmaceutical trials, likely testing kidney medications, ironically enough. The damage has been progressive. The physical strain of the rescue merely accelerated what was already happening." Martha set 3 mugs of tea on the table with shaking hands. "Can it be treated?" "There are options," Dr. Johnson replied. "Medication to manage symptoms, special diet, possibly dialysis. In severe cases like this, kidney transplant might be considered, though that's rare in veterinary medicine." "And the cost?" Amanda asked, though she already knew the answer. Dr. Johnson's silence confirmed her fears. "The medication alone would run about $400 monthly. Dialysis, if it comes to that, would mean regular treatments at the veterinary hospital in Ridgemont, several thousand at minimum." Amanda sank into a chair, mental calculations whirling. They had already stretched their finances to breaking point with Duke's initial treatments. Martha's suggestion to sell the fishing cabin was a possibility, but even that wouldn't cover ongoing care of this magnitude. "How long does he have without treatment?" she forced herself to ask. Dr. Johnson's expression softened with compassion. "Weeks, possibly. With basic care and medication, maybe a few months. He's in pain, Amanda. Not acute yet, but it's there and it will worsen." The unspoken alternative hung in the air: humane euthanasia. An end to suffering. The practical choice. "No." The word came from the doorway, where Sophie stood, her small face set in determination. "Duke will get better. I'll help him." Andy crossed the room swiftly, kneeling before her daughter. Honey, were you listening? These things are complicated. Duke didn't give up on me, Sophie said, her voice clear and unwavering. I won't give up on him. Dr. Johnson cleared his throat. Sophie, sometimes the kindest thing we can do for animals we love is let them go before they suffer too much. Sophie's chin lifted, a stubborn gesture so reminiscent of her father that Amanda's heart constricted. Duke isn't suffering. He's tired. He saved Tommy, and now he needs us to save him. With that, she turned and went back to Duke's side, leaving the adults in uncomfortable silence. Martha was the first to speak. The fishing cabin won't be enough, Amanda finished. And it's all we have left of Dad, of Harry, our safety net. Dr. Johnson packed his medical bag slowly. I can provide pain management medication at cost. It won't solve the underlying problem, but it will keep him comfortable while you make decisions. After he left, Amanda joined Sophie in the living room. Duke had fallen into an uneasy sleep, his breathing labored, one paw twitching in dreams. Sophie was reading to him from her favorite book, her voice soft but steady. Sophie, Amanda began cautiously, Dr. Johnson says Duke is very sick. I know, Sophie replied without looking up. His kidneys don't work right anymore. The directness of her response startled Amanda. You understand what that means? Sophie nodded solemnly. It means his body can't clean his blood. The bad stuff stays inside and makes him sick. She turned a page in her book. Tommy's grandpa called. He wants to help Duke get better. Amanda blinked in surprise. Mayor Edwards called? When? While you were talking to Dr. Johnson, he said he owes Duke everything. Sophie finally looked up, her eyes too old for her 7 years. He said to tell you he was wrong. Before Amanda could process this information, a knock at the door announced Jessica Miller's arrival. She entered carrying a file folder, her expression uncharacteristically nervous. I heard about Duke's diagnosis, she said, joining Amanda on the couch. I'm so sorry. Amanda nodded wearily. Dr. Johnson doesn't think there's much that can be done, not within our means anyway. Jessica fidgeted with the folder in her lap. That's partly why I'm here. There's something I need to show you, something I should have shared sooner. She took a deep breath. It's about what happened to Duke, why he disappeared. She opened the folder, revealing photographs, documents, and handwritten notes. 6 months ago, I received an anonymous tip about illegal animal testing at a private research facility outside Ridgemont. I've been working with a network of animal welfare advocates to document the operation, building a case for authorities. Amanda stared at the photos, incomprehension slowly giving way to horror. What does this have to do with Duke? The facility specialized in testing pharmaceutical products that had been rejected by legitimate research channels. They acquired animals through various means, some strays, some stolen. Jessica's voice dropped. When Duke was brought to our shelter, I recognized the injection patterns, the specific scarring. I've seen it before in other rescues from this facility. She pulled out a photograph that made Amanda's blood run cold. A sterile room filled with kennels, each containing a dog. In one corner, barely visible but unmistakable, was a German shepherd with a star-shaped patch on his chest. Duke, Amanda whispered. Jessica nodded grimly. I believe he was taken after the accident. The men who offered to help, they weren't animal control or veterinarians. They were collectors, paid to acquire specific breeds for testing. Martha, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped into the room. You knew this all along and said nothing? Not all along, Jessica clarified, guilt evident in her voice. I suspected when he first came in, but I couldn't be certain. I've been gathering evidence, working with federal investigators. The case is complicated, involving multiple states, pharmaceutical companies operating through shell corporations. Amanda struggled to process the implications. So Duke was stolen, experimented on, then what? How did he end up back at your shelter? The facility was tipped off about an impending raid. They abandoned the operation, leaving most animals behind, but some were simply turned loose or dumped at shelters in surrounding counties. Duke was one of them. Jessica reached for Amanda's hand. I didn't make the connection to Sophie's dog immediately. There was no microchip, no identification. It wasn't until I saw them together. Sophie, who had been listening intently, spoke up. The bad people hurt Duke to test medicine? Jessica hesitated, then nodded. Yes, Sophie. They were testing kidney medications, ironically enough. Then they know how to fix him, Sophie said logically. They broke him, so they know how to make him better. The adults exchanged glances. It's not that simple, honey, Amanda began. Actually, Jessica interrupted, it might be. She pulled another document from her folder. The federal investigation has resulted in seizure of assets from the research company. Part of the settlement includes a fund for rehabilitation of affected animals. Hope flickered in Amanda's chest. You mean there's money for Duke's treatment? Potentially, yes. As a documented victim, Duke would qualify for medical care under the settlement terms. Jessica's expression brightened. And there's more. The pharmaceutical company involved has a legitimate research division working on kidney therapies for humans. One of the investigators suggested they might include Duke in their companion animal trial program. Can they account for experimental treatment? Martha asked skeptically. Hasn't he been through enough of that? This would be different, Jessica assured her. Ethical protocols, proper oversight, genuine therapeutic intent, and all costs covered, including long-term care if needed. Amanda felt lightheaded with the sudden swing from despair to possibility. Why are you only telling us this now? Jessica's shoulders slumped. I was bound by confidentiality during the investigation. The federal agents were concerned about evidence tampering, witness intimidation. I couldn't risk compromising the case. She looked at Duke's sleeping form. But with his condition deteriorating, I can't keep silent anymore. He deserves a chance. The room fell quiet, except for Duke's labored breathing. Sophie had returned to his side, her small hand gently stroking his head. Martha stood by the window, arms crossed, her practical nature wrestling with these new developments. What would this treatment involve? Amanda finally asked. Specialized veterinary care in Ridgemont. Initially hospitalization, then outpatient therapy. Jessica hesitated. It would mean being separated from him during the critical phase. Sophie's head snapped up. No, Duke needs me. Sophie, Amanda began. I'll go with him, Sophie insisted. I can help. Duke understands my signs. Jessica exchanged a look with Amanda. Actually, that might be possible. The research team is studying animal-human bonds and healing outcomes. Sophie's connection with Duke, it could be valuable to their research, therapeutic for both of them. For the first time in days, real hope fluttered in Amanda's chest. But years of hardship had taught her caution. If this treatment doesn't work, then we've lost nothing by trying, Jessica said gently, and Duke will have had the best chance possible. As they discussed logistics, none of them noticed the news van pulling away outside, a reporter clutching notes about a groundbreaking animal welfare case and the brave little girl at its center, a story that would soon spread far beyond the boundaries of Echo Falls. The Ridgemont Veterinary Research Center stood in stark contrast to Echo Falls's weathered charm. Modern glass and steel rose 6 stories against the autumn sky, its reflective windows gleaming in the afternoon sun. Amanda pulled their aging sedan into the visitor parking lot, glancing in the rearview mirror at Sophie, who sat quietly holding Duke's head in her lap. We're here, honey, Amanda said, trying to infuse her voice with an optimism she didn't entirely feel. 3 weeks had passed since Jessica's revelation about Duke's ordeal. 3 weeks of hastily arranged meetings with federal investigators, veterinary specialists, and research coordinators. 3 weeks of watching Duke's condition steadily deteriorate despite Dr. Johnson's best efforts with pain management. Now they had reached what Jessica had called their last best hope, the specialized kidney treatment program that might save Duke's life, or at least extend it with quality time instead of suffering. Martha helped Sophie guide Duke from the car. The German shepherd moved slowly, his once powerful frame now gaunt, but his eyes remained alert, especially when focused on Sophie. She had refused to leave his side these past weeks, sleeping beside his bed, hand-feeding him when his appetite waned, reading to him for hours in her clear, steady voice. "Remember what Dr. Bennett explained on the phone," Amanda reminded Sophie as they approached the entrance. "They need to do tests first. Duke will stay here, and we'll come visit tomorrow." Sophie nodded, her face solemn but composed. The change in her these past months had been remarkable. From a withdrawn child unable to communicate to a focused, determined advocate for her beloved dog. She had astonished everyone with her comprehension of Duke's medical issues, absorbing complex information and asking surprisingly insightful questions of the specialist. "Sophie Wilson?" A woman in a white coat approached them at reception, her smile warm and genuine. "I'm Dr. Elaine Bennett. We spoke on the phone, and this must be Duke." The veterinary nephrologist knelt to Duke's level, examining him with professional assessment that softened into compassion. "You've been through a lot, haven't you, boy?" she murmured, running practiced hands along his sides. "We're going to try to help you feel better." As Dr. Bennett led them through security doors into the clinical area, she explained the process in terms Sophie could understand. "First, we'll get some pictures of Duke's kidneys and do blood tests to see exactly how they're working. Then we'll make a special plan just for him." The facility was nothing like Amanda had imagined. She had feared sterile, cold laboratories that would remind Duke of his traumatic past. Instead, they walked through spaces designed with animals' comfort in mind. Ambient music playing softly, comfortable bedding areas visible through observation windows, and staff who moved with unhurried gentleness. "This is where Duke will stay initially," Dr. Bennett explained, showing them a private room with a large cushioned bed, windows overlooking a garden, and monitoring equipment that seemed less intimidating than Amanda had feared. "We call it a comfort suite rather than a kennel. Someone will be with him constantly during treatments." Sophie approached the bed, testing its softness with her hand. "Duke likes to see outside," she said quietly. "He gets scared in closed rooms." Dr. Bennett nodded seriously. "That's important information, Sophie. We'll make sure the blinds stay open, and we can even move his bed closer to the window." The conversation was interrupted by a tall, distinguished man in a business suit entering the room. "Dr. Bennett, I'm sorry to intrude, but I wanted to meet our special patients personally." "Dr. Harrison, perfect timing," Dr. Bennett said. "This is Sophie and Duke Wilson, and Sophie's mother, Amanda, and grandmother, Martha. Dr. Harrison is our research director and chief of nephrology." Dr. Harrison shook hands with Amanda and Martha before kneeling to Sophie's level, a gesture that immediately raised him in Amanda's estimation. "I've heard a lot about you and Duke," he said to Sophie. "Your story has touched many people here." Sophie regarded him seriously. "Can you fix Duke's kidneys?" The directness of the question briefly startled Dr. Harrison, but he recovered quickly. "We're going to try our very best," he replied with equal directness. "Duke has kidney damage that can't be completely repaired, but we have treatments that might help his kidneys work better for longer." Sophie absorbed this information, then asked, "Because of the bad medicines they gave him before?" An uncomfortable silence fell. Jessica had prepared them for this meeting, including advice about not discussing the illegal testing facility directly. until certain legal proceedings were complete. Miss Harrison, however, responded with unexpected candor. "Yes, Sophie, the medications Duke was given at that other place weren't designed to help him. They were testing them without proper safeguards. What we're doing here is completely different. Our goal is to help Duke feel better." Sophie studied his face with the piercing directness that often made adults squirm, then nodded once. "Okay, I want to stay with him." "Sophie," Amanda began gently, "we discussed this. Duke needs to stay here for—" "Actually," Dr. Harrison interrupted, "we've been discussing that very possibility." He turned to Amanda. "Miss Wilson, our research increasingly shows that emotional support plays a crucial role in recovery outcomes, particularly with animals who form strong bonds with specific humans. Sophie's connection with Duke is extraordinary, by any standard." "You mean she could stay?" Amanda asked, surprised. "Not overnight initially," Dr. Bennett clarified, "but we've arranged for Sophie to be present during Duke's treatments and for extended visiting hours. If she's willing, we'd like to document their interaction as part of our study on human-animal bonds in medical recovery." Sophie's response was immediate. "I'll help. I can teach Duke not to be scared." The adults exchanged glances over her head, amusement mixed with respect for her determination. After completing the admission paperwork and saying a temporary goodbye to Duke, with Sophie promising him she'd return first thing tomorrow, the Wilson women headed back to the car. As they walked through the parking lot, Amanda noticed a familiar vehicle nearby. Mayor Edwards stood leaning against his SUV, clearly waiting for them. "Mayor," Amanda called, surprised. "What are you doing here?" Thomas Edwards straightened, his usual authoritative posture softened by evident discomfort. "I wanted to see how things were going with Duke's admission." Since the river rescue, the mayor had undergone a remarkable transformation in his approach to the Wilson family. The ordinance against dangerous breeds had been quietly shelved, replaced by a more nuanced proposal focused on responsible ownership. Tommy, now recovered from his injuries, had become Duke's most vocal advocate at school, sharing his rescue story with anyone who would listen. "Duke settled in," Amanda replied cautiously. "They're starting tests today." Mayor Edwards nodded, then cleared his throat. "I've been doing some thinking, Amanda, about Duke, about Sophie, about how wrong I was." He gestured toward the imposing medical building. "This treatment program, it's expensive, even with the settlement funding." "We're managing," Amanda said stiffly, unwilling to discuss their financial situation. "I'm sure you are," the mayor agreed hastily. "But Echo Falls owes Duke a debt that can't be measured. He saved my grandson, and the truth is, our community hasn't been supportive enough." Martha raised an eyebrow. "That's putting it mildly." Mayor Edwards had the grace to look abashed. "Which is why I wanted to show you this." He handed Amanda a folded document. "The town council voted unanimously last night. We've established the Duke Wilson Medical Fund. Initial donations already exceed $20,000. Amanda unfolded the paper with trembling hands, scanning the official document in disbelief. "This is... I don't understand." "It's simple," Mayor Edwards said. "Echo Falls takes care of its heroes. Duke is a hero. The fund will cover any expenses not included in the research program. Travel costs for you and Sophie, follow-up care, special equipment for your home, whatever Duke needs." Sophie, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "You're helping Duke because he saved Tommy?" The mayor knelt to her level, much as Dr. Harrison had done earlier. "Partly because of that, yes, but also because sometimes grown-ups get things wrong, and we need to fix our mistakes. I was wrong about Duke, Sophie. I judged him without knowing him. That wasn't fair." On the drive back to Echo Falls, with Sophie napping in the back seat, Amanda and Martha tried to process the day's developments. "From town pariah to town hero," Martha mused. "Who would have thought?" "I'm still not sure I trust the mayor's sudden change of heart," Amanda admitted. "People don't transform overnight." Martha glanced at her daughter. "Don't they? Look at Jessica Miller. After losing her son to a dog attack, who would have expected her to become Duke's champion? Sometimes it takes a crisis to reveal truth." Amanda couldn't argue with that. The past 6 months had taught her more about resilience in community than the previous decade. For every person who had crossed the street to avoid Duke, another had unexpectedly stepped forward with support. Dr. Johnson working for reduced fees, the neighbors taking turns bringing meals, the teachers sending home special projects for Sophie during Duke's initial recovery. As they passed the "Welcome to Echo Falls" sign at the town limits, Martha broke the contemplative silence. "I've been thinking about what Jessica told us about those men who took Duke after the accident." Amanda gripped the steering wheel tighter. The revelation that Duke had been deliberately stolen rather than rescued had ignited a slow-burning anger she was still learning to manage. "What about them? Don't you find it strange that of all the dogs they could have taken, they chose a registered therapy dog, one with specialized training in a microchip? Jessica said they targeted specific breeds for the tests. German Shepherds have similar systems to humans for certain medication." Martha shook her head. "It's more than that. That research facility didn't just happen to get Duke. I think they wanted him specifically." Amanda glanced at her mother, confused. Why would they want Duke in particular? "Well, because he's special," came Sophie's voice from the back seat. She had awakened and was listening intently. "Duke understands things other dogs don't." Martha nodded. "Exactly. Think about it, Amanda. Duke's training, his intelligence, his responsiveness to Sophie's signs, these aren't typical even for therapy dogs. Remember what Dr. Bennett said today about their research on human-animal bonds? What if the people who took Duke knew about his capabilities?" The implication settled like a stone in Amanda's stomach. "You think someone targeted him deliberately, someone who knew about his relationship with Sophie?" "I think," Martha said carefully, "that Jessica Miller hasn't told us everything she knows about that research facility. And I think we need to find out what she's still hiding." As they pulled into their driveway, Amanda's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. She opened it to find a single line of text. "Network coverage tonight. National News picked up Duke's story. Be prepared." Attached was a link to a news promo. The headline made Amanda's blood run cold. "Miracle dog or medical test subject. The shocking truth behind Echo Falls hero Shepherd." The media storm they had tried to avoid was about to break, threatening to expose not just Duke's story, but potentially the entire network of illegal research, and placing everyone involved in the crosshairs of powerful interests who preferred their activities remain hidden. 1 year to the day after Sophie and Duke's reunion at Echo Falls Animal Shelter, the town park was transformed. Colorful banners stretched between oak trees whose leaves had turned to autumn gold. Folding chairs arranged in neat rows faced a small podium decorated with paw print ribbons. A hand-painted sign proclaimed "First Annual Duke's Day Celebration," while volunteers in matching T-shirts distributed programs to arriving townspeople. Amanda Wilson stood near the refreshment table, watching Sophie adjust Duke's new therapy dog vest, a professional-grade harness bearing patches that read "Certified Therapy Dog" and "Ask Before Petting." At 8 years old, Sophie had grown taller, her once hesitant movements now confident as she guided Duke through his pre-game routine. "She's a different child," Martha said, joining Amanda with 2 cups of coffee. "Sometimes I can hardly remember how it was before." Before. The word encompassed so much. Before Duke's return, before the river rescue, before the treatment program that had saved his life, before the media storm that had ultimately brought healing, not just to Duke, but to an entire community. The past year had unfolded in ways none of them could have predicted that frightening evening when the news promo had announced Duke's story was going national. Jessica Miller had arrived at their door within an hour, face drawn with worry. "I'm so sorry," she'd said. "Someone at the research center must have leaked the story." Instead of the disaster they'd feared, however, the national coverage had become a turning point. Viewers across the country had been captivated by Sophie and Duke's journey. The miracle reunion, the heroic rescue, the fight for treatment. Letters and donations had poured in. More importantly, other victims of the illegal research operation had come forward, strengthening the federal case and expanding the settlement fund for affected animals. Duke's treatment at Ridgemont had progressed better than anyone dared hope. The specialized dialysis, followed by innovative stem cell therapy, had succeeded in restoring partial kidney function. He would never be completely cured, but with medication and careful monitoring, Duke had regained his strength, his energy, and his purpose. "Amanda," Mayor Edwards called, approaching with Tommy at his side. The boy, now 7, carried a small gift bag. "Where would you like the special guests seated?" Amanda smiled at the transformation in Thomas Edwards. From Duke's fiercest opponent to dedicated advocate, the mayor had embraced his role in Echo Falls's new identity as a model for animal welfare initiatives. "Current role is reserved," she replied. "Tommy, is that for Duke?" The boy nodded shyly. "Mom helped me make special treats. They're the kidney-friendly kind that Dr. Johnson approved." Dr. Johnson himself arrived moments later, accompanied by Dr. Bennett from Ridgemont, who had made the hour-long drive to attend. The elderly veterinarian beamed with pride as he watched Duke expertly navigate the growing crowd, alert but calm, every inch the professional therapy dog he had been retrained to be. "Never seen a recovery like it," he told Dr. Bennett. "Medical miracle, sure, but it was that child who made the difference." Dr. Bennett nodded in agreement. "Their case study has transformed our approach to animal rehabilitation. We've incorporated handler involvement in all our recovery protocols now, with measurable improvement in outcomes." As if sensing they were discussing him, Duke looked up, ears perked. Sophie followed his gaze and waved, her smile radiant. The crowd continued to grow as Echo Falls residents arrived in family groups. Frank Delaney had closed his hardware store early, setting up the sound system himself. The elementary school choir arranged themselves near the podium, rehearsing the song they had composed especially for the occasion. Reporters from regional newspapers discreetly positioned cameras, having respectfully requested permission in advance, a far cry from the invasive media frenzy of the previous year. At precisely 2 o'clock, Jessica Miller stepped up to the microphone. Her transformation was perhaps the most profound of all. No longer the guarded, grief-hardened shelter manager, she now directed Echo Falls' expanded animal welfare program, her expertise in rehabilitating traumatized animals recognized nationally. "Welcome, everyone, to Echo Falls' first annual Duke's Day," she began. "A year ago, many of us stood divided over questions of safety, breed prejudice, and community priorities. Today, we gather united in celebration of second chances and the extraordinary bond between a little girl and her very special dog." As Jessica introduced Mayor Edwards, Amanda felt a tug on her sleeve. Sophie looked up, eyes serious. "Mom, I'm nervous about my speech." Amanda knelt to her daughter's level. "You've practiced it so many times, honey. You'll do fine." "But what if I forget the words?" Sophie worried, a flash of her former anxiety surfacing. Duke immediately pressed against her side, offering silent support. Sophie's hand automatically went to his head, drawing comfort from the familiar contact. "You forget," Amanda said gently. "Just tell them how you feel about Duke. That's all that matters." Sophie considered this, then nodded with newfound determination. "Okay, we can do it together." On the podium, Mayor Edwards was announcing the official unveiling of Duke's Law, Echo Falls Comprehensive Animal Welfare Ordinance that replaced breed-specific restrictions with education initiatives, responsible ownership requirements, and support programs for families in need. "Rather than banning certain breeds," he explained, "we've created a framework that recognizes the true factors in animal behavior: training, environment, and human responsibility. Thanks to Duke, Echo Falls now has the lowest animal surrender rate in the state and a model shelter program that focuses on rehabilitation rather than euthanasia." The crowd applauded warmly. Mrs. Patterson, the retired English teacher, wiped away tears. Even old Mr. Hargrove, who had once led the petition against German Shepherds, nodded in grudging approval. Dr. Johnson spoke next, providing updates on the medical program Duke had helped pioneer, a collaboration between Ridgemont Research Center and 5 regional veterinary clinics to provide advanced care for animals with kidney disease. Already 27 dogs and 9 cats had received treatment that would otherwise have been unavailable. "Duke wasn't just saved," Dr. Johnson concluded. "He became the catalyst for saving countless others." When it was finally Sophie's turn, Amanda held her breath. Public speaking remained challenging for her daughter, whose autism made crowds and unstructured social situations overwhelming. They had practiced for weeks, but the reality of all those expectant faces might prove too much. Sophie approached the podium slowly, Duke keeping perfect pace beside her. She adjusted the microphone, took a deep breath, and froze, her prepared words seemingly forgotten as she stared at the assembled townspeople. Amanda started to rise, ready to step in, but Martha placed a restraining hand on her arm. "Wait," she whispered. The silence stretched for one uncomfortable moment, then two. Duke looked up at Sophie, then deliberately placed his paw on her foot, one of their special signals. Something in Sophie's expression shifted. She reached down to touch Duke's ear, then looked back at the crowd with newfound calm. "My name is Sophie Wilson," she began in a clear voice that carried across the park. "This is Duke. 1 year ago today, I went to the animal shelter to say goodbye to hope. Instead, I found my voice." The simple words, different from her practiced speech but infinitely more powerful, brought tears to Amanda's eyes. "Duke and I want to tell you about our journey," Sophie continued, her confidence growing, "and about how sometimes the things that seem broken can become the strongest if you love them enough." For the next 5 minutes, Sophie spoke without notes or hesitation, telling their story with a child's directness and an old soul's wisdom. She talked about Duke's rescue, his illness, the treatment that saved him, and their new mission visiting children's hospitals and nursing homes as a certified therapy team. "Duke was hurt by people, but he still trusts people," she said. "That's the bravest thing I know. He teaches me every day how to be brave too." As Sophie concluded to thunderous applause, Duke sat tall beside her, his once-scarred coat now glossy and full, his eyes clear and bright with intelligence and trust. The emaciated, terrified animal from the shelter isolation ward had been transformed through the same force that had brought Sophie out of her silence, the healing power of unconditional love. The formal ceremony concluded with the unveiling of a small bronze statue near the park entrance. A German shepherd and a child walking side by side. The plaque beneath it read simply, "Duke and Sophie, Courage, Compassion, Connection. Echo Falls remembers." As townspeople mingled afterward, sharing refreshments and stories, Amanda found herself standing beside Jessica Miller, watching Sophie demonstrate Duke's therapy dog skills to a group of fascinated children. "Did you ever imagine it would turn out like this?" Jessica asked quietly. Amanda shook her head. "Never. When Duke disappeared, I thought our worst nightmare had happened. Then when he came back so damaged, I thought we were facing another kind of nightmare." She turned to Jessica. "Thank you. for everything, for bringing him back to us, for fighting for his treatment, for changing how this town thinks about animals like him." Jessica's smile held a touch of her old sadness. "Duke and Sophie changed me too. For 10 years after Michael died, I let fear define me. I couldn't see past the danger to the possibility of healing." She watched Duke gently accept a treat from Tommy's hand. "Some scars don't disappear, but they can become something different. A mark of where we've been, not a limitation on where we can go." As the afternoon light softened into evening, families began to drift homeward. Sophie and Duke led Amanda and Martha along the river path, no longer a place of tragedy, but reclaimed as their favorite walking route. Duke moved with the measured pace of a dog who had learned to conserve his energy, but his step was sure, his tail held high. Sophie skipped ahead, then turned back, waiting for them to catch up. "Duke wants ice cream," she announced. Martha laughed. "Does he now? And did he tell you that?" Sophie nodded solemnly. "He did, in dog language." Then her serious expression cracked into a mischievous grin, a normal child's playfulness that had once seemed beyond reach. "Well," Amanda said, "I think we can manage that, just this once, for Duke's special day." As they walked toward town, Amanda realized that Echo Falls itself had been transformed. The struggling former mining community had found new purpose, new identity, and new hope, all because a broken dog and a silent child had found each other again against impossible odds. Sometimes, she reflected, watching Duke lean affectionately against Sophie's side, the deepest wounds create the strongest bonds. And sometimes the smallest beings teach the greatest lessons about courage, forgiveness, and the extraordinary healing power of being truly seen and unconditionally loved. In our twilight years, we recognize life's most profound truths, that healing comes in unexpected forms, and second chances are precious beyond measure. Sophie and Duke's journey reminds us that even in our darkest moments, when grief silences a child's voice or cruelty breaks an innocent spirit, hope persists. Many of us have weathered our own storms, lost loved ones, faced illness, or felt the sting of prejudice. Like Duke, we carry scars that tell our stories. Like Sophie, we've known the struggle to find our voice in a world that doesn't always listen. But their tale speaks to something we understand deeply: the healing power of unconditional love. When Duke recognized Sophie across that shelter room, when their broken pieces fit together perfectly, they became whole again. They remind us that it's never too late for transformation, never too late to rebuild trust, never too late to find purpose in pain. In Echo Falls, a community divided learned to see beyond assumptions to deeper truths. Perhaps that's the greatest lesson for us all, that wisdom comes not from avoiding life's injuries, but from how we heal together, creating something more beautiful because of, not despite, our broken places. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.